Good evening, friends. It's a delight to welcome all of you here again in this warm May evening. And today we are having this webinar on healthcare in times of COVID-19. How do we protect ourselves? And today's focus would be on pre and paraclinical specialties. And we would be talking specifically to the needs of these departments. So this is the third in the series of these webinars. We had previous two webinars in which first we addressed the surgical specialties and then we had addressed the medical specialties. So today we are going to talk to the pre and paraclinical specialties today. We have people from different departments, and I'm glad to also share that we have people from different backgrounds. We have interns, students, some are residents, and some are faculty members. In fact, we have people as far away as Imphal also having joined us for the webinar today. And we are covering a wide range of audience sitting here in Delhi, from Delhi to Imphal. So what are you presently thinking? Some of you might be thinking that as I'm in a pre and paraclinical specialty, I'm in anatomy, I'm in physiology, this doesn't relate to me. COVID cannot affect me because I'm not dealing with patients. But mind you, friends, this is even more important for you. And why do I say so? Why do I say it's even more important to you? Just for the simple reason that sooner or later, you're going to be called upon to perform clinical duties or to look at patients as soon as the frontline workers are down and the number of patients increase. And when that happens, there is not going to be enough time to impart any kind of training, and you would be left lurching and fending for yourself. So if you look at this now, and if you discuss and think about this now, you might be slightly better prepared than the rest of us. And moreover, you are already dealing with the problems in your departments, in the laboratories, and in the society at this time. But please remember that whatever you do, sabka number aayega. And practically, if you're working in GTB hospital, so assume कि आपका number तो आ ही गया है. Let me here introduce our faculty and the panel on the webinar today. We have Dr. N.P. Singh, Director Professor of Department of Microbiology, Dr. Sonal Sharma, who's Director Professor in the Department of Pathology. We have Dr. Arvind Kumar, who's Assistant Professor in the Department of Forensic Medicine, and Dr. Sumita, who is the Associate Professor in Pharmacology. I would ask and request the faculty members to please introduce themselves. Dr. N.P. Singh. Oh, we can't hear you. You would have to unmute yourself. Let me unmute you if that is required. Yes. You should be able to speak now. You could switch on your mic and speak.
Yes. Now are you listening?
Yes, it's better, audible.
Okay, fine. So I'm Dr. N.P. Singh. I'm Professor of Microbiology at UCMS and GTB Hospital. And this time in this great teaching learning sessions, basically, today we are sharing our perspective regarding COVID-19 infection and how the laboratory people, our technical staff, how residents, how faculty members, how are they prepared about this particular pandemic. And I think you all know that it started in December 19. And can I say a few words?
Absolutely.
So it started in December 19, and that is why it is known as, the disease is known as COVID-19. It's a new coronavirus, and this coronavirus has been now, because SARS was already there, so it is SARS-CoV-2, and the disease is known as COVID-19. And it started from China, but very fastly in January, February, or March, it spread, and in March 11, WHO declared this as a pandemic. And now you know that the situation, like in May, this May, there are more than 5 billion people they are affected, and there have been quite a few deaths. You can see it's more than 5% or so if you look for total. And this is an RNA virus, which is an enveloped virus. And the important thing is about when we look in terms of SARS virus and MRSA, both of them, they are from the same family, but the R naught or the transmission rate, which is very important in case of COVID-19, this transmission rate is quite high. Though transmission rate was high also in case of MRSA, the fatality was very high, and in case of SARS also the fatality was more than this. But here the transmissibility, human to human spread has become very important, and this spread is based on that the incubation period. We all know that the incubation period is 2 to 14 days, and the average incubation period is 5 days. But the important thing is that during incubation period, this virus can be transmitted. And why it is important? Because this is a respiratory virus, and being a respiratory virus, it spreads by respiratory droplets, and secondly, indirectly by, you can say, by fomites. And in some specific conditions where aerosol generating procedures are being done in very close, the airborne chance of airborne infection may be there. So because of its transmissibility, I think that it has got 2 to 3 people can be infected by a single positive case during the course of the disease. So though the virus is it's the biosafety level 2 virus, it's very fragile virus, but once it gets into the body, then I think it becomes important. Though most of the time infection remains asymptomatic, but then mild infections, then severe infections, then acute respiratory distress syndrome. That I think that is your part basically. So I think this is about the I can say the course which has till we have seen.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sonal, your introductory comments and your introduction yourself.
Yeah. First of all, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this. So basically, what I will be dealing with will be when you're working in the laboratory, you're receiving the specimens. What are the spectrum of specimens we get, and what are the precautions we must be taking while receiving and processing them? So a little bit about that I'll be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita.
Hi, I am Dr. Sumita, Associate Professor from Department of Pharmacology. And I'm glad to be a part of this seminar, which deals with the pre and paraclinical departments and the concerns regarding them. Now, pharmacology does not routinely deal with direct patient care. Yet our residents are being posted for COVID duty in the Rajiv Gandhi Super Speciality Hospitals. So, though belonging to these pre and paraclinical departments, it is very important for our residents of and also the doctors who are being posted to be aware of the precautionary measures and all the preventive measures they should take during these times. So yes, I hope that this session will be very informative for our residents, our junior doctors, our students, and I'll also learn in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita. Dr. Arvind.
Hello.
Yes, Dr.
Good evening.
Yeah, you're on.
I am Dr. Arvind. I'm assistant professor in the forensic medicine, and my part is to deal with the how to deal dead due to COVID infection patient. And as Dr. NP Singh said, that it's a droplet infection. Patient who cough and due to respiration, the infection is spread, but it also be spread by dead bodies. Dead body is a passively it secrete the secretions which is oozed out during the death process. There is the agonal feature when the nasal secretion and oral secretion is oozed out, and by this secretion, the COVID also is spread. So how to deal or how to handle the dead, that is my part, and I will tell what I know about this, and I also learned from the eminent teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind. So let's launch into the first of the slides, and I'm just going to speak a little bit about in this webinar. I'm going to talk about some general tips which are definitely good to be followed by practically everyone. I will be talking about tips for your current working situation, how you should be working in the present time when you are still in the laboratory. There would be some tips that we would be talking about when you are called in for active care. We will be busting some myths about the PPE. We'll talk about the report. What does it mean, a positive or a negative report? We will talk about your concerns of taking your infection home, and we will finally talk about what you need to do if you feel that you are exposed. Some general tips. There are some questions which often come to mind. Are you at a greater risk than others? Being a healthcare worker, working in the pre and paraclinical departments, do you think you are at a greater risk than others? Yes, you are definitely at a greater risk. The Lancet editorial on March 21 put this issue to rest. And when it spoke about protecting the healthcare workers, and it also talked about how people working in hospitals and healthcare settings are at a greater risk than others. Obviously, you're coming to the hospital, which is an infected environment and has got lots of patients who have positive and negative status. So obviously, you would be at a greater risk. Another question that comes to mind often is, are you at a greater risk of complications? Now, being at a greater risk is not necessarily equivalent to being at a greater risk of complications. It has been seen so far that complications are higher depending upon the age and the comorbidity profile of the infected individual, and has got nothing to do with the profession of the individual. However, there has been some debate in which people have started arguing or have suggested that being a healthcare worker, your inoculum of the virus or your exposure or your intake of the virus is definitely much higher than the people who are in the general public or who are at home. And so when the inoculum of the virus is higher and the strain of the virus may be such that it is more virulent, then yes, your risk of complications may still be a little higher than what the general public is facing. However, that question still is under debate and consideration, and we don't have the final answer on it. And since you're already at a greater risk of infecting yourself, and you might be at a greater risk of getting the complications, there is no harm in taking due precautions while the time is still at your hands. At this point, let's talk a little bit about prophylaxis, and I would invite Dr. Sumita to kindly share more on what is the status and situation of healthcare workers prophylaxis. Dr. Sumita, let me try and unmute this for you. Yes, I think it should be working now. Yes, Dr. Sumita.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashish. Now, just as we saw in the previous slide, sabka number aayega. So the reason why we have gathered here today to hear about these preventive measures and all the precautions that need to be taken is कि हमारा number ना आए. So among all the measures that can be taken, among all the sanitation and the other preventive measures, one is chemoprophylaxis. Now, a lot is being discussed about chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine being taken as chemoprophylactic drug to prevent COVID. There was a recent article in the Lancet, we must have known, if many of you must have seen. I think it was dated last Friday, wherein it was stated a study was reported covering 6 continents over 670 hospitals, wherein patients were given chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine with or without the antibiotic, the macrolide antibiotic. And what was observed, the outcome that was observed was the hospital mortality and the occurrence of ventricular tachycardia. And it was found that the hospital mortality as well as the occurrence of the ventricular tachycardia increased. So this study has created great panic whether or not to use chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine as the chemoprophylactic drug, which was initially being advocated. Almost simultaneously, ICMR revised guidelines have come, which states, which advocates the use of this drug, hydroxychloroquine, for healthcare workers. Now, this has this also has strong basis to it, based on the reports from the National Institute of Virology, Pune. Just to give you a background of it, why ICMR has put, and there has been various studies conducted by ICMR, wherein this drug was given to healthcare professionals, and it was found that the frequency of occurrence of COVID infection was far less in those having taken this prophylactic drug than those who have not taken it. There have been at least, I think, 3 studies which have been reported by ICMR. So as of now, the revised ICMR guideline stands that hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis should be given to the asymptomatic healthcare workers posted in COVID hospitals, also asymptomatic healthcare workers posted in non-COVID hospitals like ours. So both our residents who are being posted to Rajiv Gandhi, as well as those doctors working in GTB, they both have been recommended by ICMR to take this drug. And then next, the household contacts, the asymptomatic household contacts who have been exposed to the to patients who have tested positive. They all have been advised to take chloroquine 400 milligrams, just to give you an idea of dose, 400 milligrams BD on the first day and 400 milligrams OD weekly, to be taken either for 3 weeks or 7 weeks. So now, since there is already a risk of side effects, so before initiation, there should be ECG, the QT interval should be assessed. And also, if it has to be given more than 8 weeks, ECG has to be done. And the strict contraindications due to which various side effects take place is known to many, that is G6PD deficiency, retinopathy, some underlying cardiomyopathy. And what ICMR instructs to take special care of is that this drug should be given with prescription, with informed consent by a registered medical practitioner. And if in the course of taking the drug, any adverse event or reaction is reported, then this should be immediately reported by self-reporting using the Pharmacovigilance Program of India helpline. That is, self-reporting is to be done to report any adverse side effects. So yes, this is about the chemoprophylaxis, which has been put forth by the latest ICMR guidelines. And yes, ICMR issues a warning also that this drug, if the doctors are taking this drug, it should not instill a false sense of security. That if they are taking it, they should not shun using the PPEs. They should not shun from using masks. That they have taken this wonder pill, so they do not need not take any preventive measures. So this is a risk that is there. So there's a warning. And I think, and yes, pharmacokinetic data is pooling in, newer evidence is coming in. So, so long as the new recommendations don't come in, the ICMR guidelines as such stands that chemoprophylaxis should be taken. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita. Thank you for your kind inputs. So a little more on prophylaxis, and to sum up what she said, yes, the ICMR advisory still exists. It came out almost a month and longer before, We are giving HCQS for prophylaxis as per this advisory. However, there are studies on both sides of the spectrum. Some have shown benefit, some have shown harm. So the debate is still open and is still on. We have left prophylaxis to the choice of the individual who wants to take the prophylaxis. Lancet has been leading this debate largely, and over the last 2 weeks, there have been contradictory letters to the editor in the issues of the Lancet. Whereas a week ago, there was an article by one of our own ex-students from UCMS, Sahaj Rathi and his group, in which he challenged the ICMR advisory, and it was given a full consideration by the Lancet, and it threw the ball to the cats and through the cat into the pigeons. And a lot of debate has since then been raging. The Lancet, which was published 2 days ago, carries another opposing view, again by another one of my students at AIIMS. He's now a professor there in the Department of Medicine, and this presents a completely different view on why the HCQS advisory is good and is active. So we will know better probably in time, but till then, it depends upon the individual. But yes, as Dr. Sumita has rightly pointed out, even if you have taken HCQS, please do not think that you are safe and no wrong can happen to you. You still need to be as careful as before and be very, very aware that you are still at great risk. With this, I invite Dr. NP Singh to share something about the vaccine. We are still awaiting the onset or the arrival of the vaccine, and all of us around the world are eagerly waiting for this. And Dr. NP Singh, some views on the vaccine and what we can do while we wait for it? Yeah, you have to unmute your mic, sir. You will have to unmute your mic and speak. Yes, now it's good.
So I said that particularly when we talk of these
Yes,
coronavirus,
sir. Go ahead.
was like in case of SARS and MERS, the vaccine was
Dr.
not
NP
taken.
Singh?
Yes, listening. Am I audible?
I think there might be an issue with his mic, possibly.
Okay. No. Just a minute. Can you unmute me? नहीं, आवाज कम आ रही है. Now, are you listening? आ रही है? Okay, fine. ठीक है. So, as I said that in case of MERS and SARS, there was vaccine was never thought of in that way, which has been thought in case of SARS-CoV-2, because the transmission rate is very high and the pandemic is so large that it feels that most of the population will be infected. So the trials for vaccines are being going on. So right now there are two major vaccines. One is from Moderna, that is from Oxford University, that is showing some that is going into phase 3 trials, and though it has been the effectivity is not very high in that case, but still they feel that it may be important to reduce the severity of the infection. And the second, there is a Chinese vaccine which is also going into this thing. But my point of view is that before vaccine comes, we have to again and again emphasize the points which are related to respiratory droplet infections, where the terminology of social distancing has come up, where the terminology of mask management has come up, and where the emphasis on hand hygiene is with the right percentage of alcohol concentration is there. So those things have become more important before the vaccine comes. So I think social distancing, which has been told that up to 6 feet, so that is based on the droplet, large droplets, they fall very fast, and they get dried up very fast also, and they get dried up also, but they can be found on the floors. But smaller droplets, they go up to 1 meter to 2 meter, and they are usually evaporated. So that is why the safe distance of 2 meter has come into place. And second is that the mask management, we should importance of surgical mask, that is very important. So most of us, we require surgical mask, and how to wear it, how to dispose it, and what should be the quality of the mask. So American standards or their equivalent standards are being followed, where the fit of the mask is very important. It says that a mask is as effective as it fits. So when it fits well, then it is more effective. And in that case, how we are assured that it is fit? We have to look for the nose clip, which should be there at the top. We have to see the lighter side, which should be inside, and we have to see the darker side, where three pleats, they should fall downward, and the gaps between the nose and cheek and chin can be adjusted by the knots which we can have. So most of these surgical masks, when they follow the standards, uh, particles larger than 5 micron, they or like the particles like Staph aureus, 95% of the time 3 micron size particle. So respiratory droplets, they are more than 5 micron. So they are 95% of the times they are filtered. So those masks, they are known as surgical masks, and which are important for and how to means when to discard your mask, when it is damp, when it is dislodged, or when it is torn. You have to dispose it very in an efficient manner, and you have to take a new mask basically. So these masks, they are disposable masks. They should not be used again. And most important is that the mask etiquettes are that we should not touch the mask from by our hands. If we touch the mask by our hands, we have to wash our hands either with soap and water or with alcohol sanitizer. So touching of the mask from outside is a very common phenomena which we are seeing, but I think that should be avoided to a great extent, and it may come as your alertness, and means because of re-emphasis of these points. I think our alertness should be such that we should make it as a habit that while we are mask is on, we should not touch the mask from the outside. So
Yes, sir. We have an entire section on masks coming up. Yes.
And then hand hygiene with the right concentration of alcohol, approximately 70 to 80%, or in case of isopropyl alcohol, it is 75%. And usually liquid based alcohol sanitizers, they are more preferred than this thing than gel based. And they say that soap and water is very effective. So when soap and water is not there, then we can use alcohol as a sanitizer. And the soap and water is very effective in killing the virus basically, because it detaches the envelope of the virus. So by forming the leather or micelles, it enters into the envelope and detaches the envelope from the virus. So that makes virus dead. So soap and water is very effective, and then the hand sanitizer with the right concentration of alcohol, that is important. And then etiquettes of gloves, that is also very important, that when we wear gloves we should not be overconfident that because after wearing the gloves we are opening the door, we are closing the door, and we are not taking care of the fomites which we are leaving on the surfaces. So that is also important as far as gloves are important. And then gowns and the other parts of the PPE, they are important during this period of time, or particularly in the labs.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for your inputs. I see that Dr. Mohit Mendiratha has raised a question for Dr. Sumita regarding the prophylaxis. Dr. Mohit, why don't you ask this question yourself? I have unmuted you now.
Hi, Dr. Ashish. Hello, Dr. Ashish. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely clear. Go ahead.
Okay, the question is like actually before we start this HCQ prophylaxis, do you recommend any baseline investigations? Like so that they can be done and like with all the people who are like going to be on duty, or even like the regular postgraduate students who are regularly collecting the samples for this thesis and all. Like so, the thing is, do you recommend any baseline investigations before you start HCQ prophylaxis?
So, Dr. Mohit, there has been enough debate on the initial investigations that need to be done with before starting prophylaxis, and both sides of the debate has been active. Both sides have been pretty active in this. The only complications with HCQS that have been shown are some cardiovascular complications from QT prolongation and some cases of sudden cardiac death. However, HCQS is a very safe drug and has been used in rheumatology for ages. In fact, people have been prophylaxed on HCQS treatment for years together without any definitive or without any real complications or mortality being reported. So as of now, no initial investigation is required unless you are having any specific cardiovascular disease, and unless the individual is having any specific cardiovascular disease, no investigation is necessary and HCQS prophylaxis can be started. Dr. Sumita, would you like to add something to that? Dr. Sumita, would you like to add something to that?
No. It's perfectly fine. One, if we go by the ICMR guidelines, we can take a baseline ECG if needed. That's all, to just assess the QTC interval.
Thank you.
At the beginning of the treatment, and if it has to be continued more than 8 weeks, then also it is required. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita. Let's move on from the prophylaxis and go on to general advice while you're in the hospital. Since we largely know that this is a droplet infection, it is carried on by microparticles and droplets which are suspended in the air while you are talking to someone or when someone is sneezing or coughing. So the infection does not spread very far and it's effectively controlled by masks. So definitely you should maintain your distance and wear your masks. There is not enough has been said about that, and I don't think we need to go into more details from there on. Please avoid elevators and lift. If you have to use them and cannot do without the elevator, stand facing the walls. And if the particular elevator is crowded, please wait a little while longer till you get a free elevator or till you get a vacant elevator instead of exposing yourself further to the risk. It's been seen that hand hygiene is something that हमें लगता है कि ये तो हमें आता है ना, इसमें हमें क्या जरूरत है किसी से पूछने की और सीखने की, या मास्क हमें तो आता है, we know all about masks, we know all about PPEs, but it's always a good idea that you ask one of your friends or colleagues to observe you while you are doing hand hygiene, washing your hands and putting on your mask or touching your mask. And you might be surprised at the problems that they are able to point out and which can lead to effective behavior change once you get that kind of feedback from your colleagues. Referrals, mostly in clinical settings, if you feel that a referral is really required, only then you take it. In laboratory settings, if an investigation is really required, then there is some point in doing it. Otherwise, there is nothing like routine investigations. And obviously, you please take care of general precautions so that you don't get caught unaware, and you sanitize your keys, glasses, pens, and other instruments and items that you bring to the hospital and take back daily. Otherwise, you might be in for disaster at some point of time, and you might be carrying your infection back home. It's possible to live your life without mobile phones. And when you are in sample handling areas or patient care areas, when you are called upon to look at patients, please be sure that you don't carry your mobile phone, because that's the hotbed and a good culture media for all the virus and bacteria that you encounter in the hospital. So while working in the laboratories, there might be added issues and precautions that you would need to take while you're working in the lab, handling specimens. And again, I'm going to invite Dr. NP Singh here for his inputs on how do we take care of ourselves while we are handling samples in the laboratory. Dr. NP Singh, please unmute your mic and you're good to speak now.
So, are you listening yet now?
Yes. Perfect.
Because as you all know that we are dealing with different types of specimen. So that is very important that because most of the time our attendants, they go to collect the specimens from the specimen collection area, and then they come to the department and they transport the specimen, and then they leave the specimens in the different rooms. So specimen handling is very important, and it is all the their safety is also as important as our safety. They should also wear masks, they should also wear gloves, they should also wear aprons, they should also wear some face shield also, so that while carrying the samples, and because if there is an accident, there may be some splashes. So to avoid those accidents and splashes, they should wear mask and face shields, which is very important for them. And as far as I told that when the
Yep, I think there has been some communication failure from Dr. NP Singh, and probably his connection has broken off. So we will continue from here, and once he joins back, probably then we will look at it much more. And again, a little more tips when you're working in the laboratory. May I bring in Dr. Sonal Sharma here? Dr. Sonal, you could unmute your mic and probably speak, or let me try to give you mic access. Yes, you should have mic access now.
Okay, I think I'm audible now. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I'll be talking because I think Dr. NP Singh, when he continue, will talk more about the microbiological and the infective material which we are getting. But a major chunk of material which we get is not for microbiology, of course. We get for different labs, like in hematology, where we get the blood, but in which it's simply the vial is, the vacuum container is directly fed to the machine. So there's not much of exposure there. But what we have in histopathology and cytopathology is a lot of potential of exposure to specimens is there. Because we must remember that, like in cytology, because of whatever the material you get, or you're doing the aspiration on the patient, so there's a lot of risk to you. So whenever you're going to the clinic and performing the FNACs, you must be wearing these 4 essential things, like your mask, your eye covers, your gloves, and your gown. These 4 things must be there. You don't have to do a complete PPE type, but at least this much is the minimum. Of course, face shield is also there, which will help you. And you should keep your hair tied and wear a cap if possible. So bottom line is, in FNAC, when you're doing the FNACs, especially in the cervical lymph nodes and all, the patient might be, he might be openly coughing near you, or so try to make all the precautions. Do not call all the patients inside at one time. And this is like for the FNACs, but FNAC is still okay because you're conscious, you know the patient is there, and you have to take it for granted that like every patient is a potentially positive patient. So you have to all the time think that the patient can be positive and do your job accordingly. Then the specimens which are being received in the labs, another thing you have to remember for all labs is that only the essential work should be done. Like the screening, cancer screening programs and other things should be stopped. They should not, because you're not trying to overload the lab with too much specimens, because then the chances of exposure increase. And right now we should not be getting specimens which are just for inflammatory, or like a patient of cirrhosis and this and that. All those kind of samples, they should be, which can be avoided, should be avoided. Only for malignancy, of course, we can't stall it. All the malignancies, suspicious of malignancies, when they are suspected, those specimens should be taken and processed. Especially the bronchial specimens should be avoided, like bronchial lavages and aspirates, because they are much more higher risk of contamination. And all these specimens in the laboratory should be handled very cautiously inside the hood only. They should not be opened openly, and the staff should be trained for that. Then in histopathology, we usually have this false this thing ki we are safe because all the specimens is coming in formalin. Yes, formaldehyde does kill all the bacteria and the viruses, but it takes time to do that. So you must remember that a small biopsy should have been fixed for at least 24 hours before you think that it is free of any infection. And a large specimen, let's say a CA breast or CA colon, which we are getting, even nowadays, we are getting malignancy specimens, big resections. So they should be kept for 2 to 3 days, depending on the size of the specimens. Of course, we always give cuts, otherwise they'll become autolyzed. So just give some prelim cuts and leave it in the formalin with abundant formalin, and leave it for 2 to 3 days. Only then go ahead and do the grossing. Aerosolized things can happen whenever you're doing under pressure, is like when you get a sarcoma or amputation of the any limb. In those scenarios, we need to cut the bone, and that is done by a power saw, and that it generates so much aerosols. So please do not do any such thing. Do not do any resection. We can just do a minimum dissection, and just basically we have to check the end of the bone for the tumor and just whether the bone is involved. So we don't need to do a complete procedure, because no way you should be exposing yourself. So what is most important is doing the job, doing what is the basic minimum required, and keeping yourself safe.
Thank you, Dr. Sonal, for those inputs. And before we go on from here, I'm going to launch a poll for you. And this poll is a simple poll. It will show up on your screens now, and it will allow you to enter a response if you click on a particular response which you choose. So please answer this poll. Who do you think is most likely to pose the risk of infection or exposure to you? Is it a patient who is COVID positive? Is it a patient who's COVID negative? Is it a patient whose COVID status is unknown? Or is it one of your colleagues or your family? Please answer this poll as it appears on your screen now. We're going to close the poll in another 10 seconds. So it's a simple poll. Let's see what you have answered, and almost quite 80% of you have already answered the poll. So I'm going to close the poll now and launch the results with you so that you can see the results. So most of you have rightly, as you have pointed out, that it's a patient whose COVID status is unknown. So usually it's a positive patient who people feel is at risk. However, the positive patient is unlikely to pose a risk to you, because you are more than likely to take all your precautions when you are dealing with a positive patient or a positively known sample. The only important thing that I wanted to bring to your attention which only one or two people got and thought about that, is that your colleagues are equally dangerous. And that's when you are in the department and you are thinking that you are safe, you might be surprised to find that one of them tests positive and next day all of you are exposed. So I'm going to bring in at this point Dr. Sumita, who's going to talk a little bit about how we need to be careful in while we are working in the department. Dr. Sumita, go ahead.
Yes. So tips for working in the department is very much same as those in offices. So much has already been discussed about the precautions to be taken in the lab while handling samples and doing various laboratory procedures. As far as departmental work is concerned, it will be maintenance of hygiene of floor, maintaining the cleanliness of the floors, and all the exposed surfaces. That is cleaning of the tabletops, the desktops, the telephones, and all the objects lying on the table. They should be regularly cleaned with hypochlorite. Then, as Dr. NP Singh has already stressed, hand washing, and all the people, whether teaching or non-teaching staff in the department, should be made aware of the proper hand washing techniques, which is many videos are available, and videos are being made by the MU also to learn the proper hand washing techniques. And every person in the department should maintain the proper respiratory hygiene, that is by wearing masks, as Dr. NP Singh rightly pointed out, at least the surgical mask. And we should avoid those handshakes. These are the universal precautions. The handshakes, any close proximity, and if any colleague or any staff is suffering from low-grade fever, is coughing with a running nose, he or she should be advised to stay at home. And yes, while scheduling of meetings, if a meeting has to be scheduled, then the option of holding a teleconference or an online meeting should be considered before scheduling a face-to-face meeting. And if at all a face-to-face meeting is needed, then again the adequate social distancing with at least 1 to 2 meters distance from each other. Minimum number of attendees should attend. The room should be properly ventilated. And yes, all the hand sanitizers, the rub dispensers, everything should be made available. So I think that's all. These are the general tips which we need to follow while working in the department. Rest everything has been done.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita. Let's move on from the department and go on to a situation when the number of people rises and you are already called upon to deliver clinical care. So I hope that most of you are aware that a roster for the time period and when the different departments might be called in to provide clinical care depending upon the number of patients that GTB hospital gets has already been circulated, and you are aware of what that there might be a time if we see the peak of the pandemic maybe in a month or so, where people from different clinical or non-clinical or paraclinical departments may even be called to provide clinical care on the ground in the line of care. And some of the residents from pharmacology and even other departments have already been invited, have been involved in clinical care. And here is a voice recording or a message which one of the residents has recorded for us on her experiences while she was posted to provide clinical care, which I'm going to play for you now.
Hello everyone. I am Dr. Jyotsna Nivati, a resident of Department of Pharmacology. As we all know that the number of cases are increasing tremendously and more number of healthcare workers are being infected. So whether we belong to a pre or a paraclinical department, we all should be mentally prepared to work and manage COVID patients, because sooner or later we're all going to be posted. in the COVID ward or somewhere else. I was posted in the month of April. I was posted in Rajiv Gandhi Super Specialty Hospital in the isolation ward, and I would love to share my experience as how I protected myself from the virus and what all precautions I took. The most important thing that one should take care about is taking off a PPE. Kindly watch all the videos and follow all the instructions while you take off a PPE and how to wear it. So when you take a PPE off, kindly follow all the steps and sanitize your hands after taking off anything, like after you take off a head cover, you take off a PPE, shoe cover. Every time you do something, kindly follow the sanitize your hands. What I personally did was after every duty, after like I used to finish off my duty, I carried a soap with me, and while coming out of the hospital, I used to wash my hands on all face, exposed areas, everything before coming back. So that you can do. Secondly, carry minimum things with you. While usually we carry a bag and we carry books, stuff, papers, everything. Try not to carry all these things while you're going to a ward or while you're going to a duty. Just carry a pen and mobile phones. And what you can do is like don't carry even a pen. Just take a pen on the first day of duty, keep it over there, and use it, and leave it after you finish your duty. Just leave the pen over there. So main concern was like you cannot sanitize your phone every time you take it. What I did, that was my personal thing. I used to cover it with a plastic, and I covered it with a plastic. And every time I used to touch anything before touching my phone, I used to sanitize that plastic cover so that my phone is also protected easily. And after that, just when you come out, throw the plastic off, and you can easily save your phone. What else you can do is like always wear a glove. Double gloving is very necessary, and follow the steps while you sanitize your hands. Follow all the steps, rub everything properly. So that's what I used to do. And after everything I used to touch, I used to sanitize my hands every time. Cover your face properly, wear your mask properly. Secondly, all those who are wearing spectacles, just remember that you it is something that is very near to your face. So either wear a goggle, or if you don't have any goggle, like during my posting, we used to have either a face cover or a goggle. दोनों में से कुछ होता था. So and while we are out, not contacting the patient,
I think we'll just wait for Ashish to rejoin. So Dr. NT Singh, maybe you can continue, sir. You will need to unmute yourself, sir. We can't hear you, sir. You are not audible, sir. Can you guys hear me? Am I audible? Okay. So maybe I'll say a few more things for the lab. Okay, Ashish is back. Ashish, you're not audible.
In Rajiv Gandhi Hospital, where she was posted for clinical care. So let me go on further and bring you up to speed on how you might be involved in patient care and what you need to do and think while you are working in these areas. So when you're working in the outpatient department in the fever clinic, there are certain things that you need to be more careful about and certain things that you need to remember. I know it's the month of summer and we are all in May and all of us feel hot and we are working in the highest heat. However, it is best to avoid the AC. Keep the temperature at the highest tolerable level if you need to run the AC. Often it's found that people close the doors and windows use your face shields. The face shields are easily available in the hospital. So please get your face shields and use them when you are posted in the fever clinic or when you are posted in outpatient care areas. If you're called upon to provide inpatient care, then it's best to turn the head of the patient to the opposite side when you are trying to auscultate the patient or take the blood pressure, giving injections or drawing blood or doing any kind of procedures on the patient. It's best to plan, 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 and plan. The more you plan your visit into the outpatient or the inpatient cubicle, you will be able to do more things in one visit, and you will be reducing your own exposure to the patients at that particular point of time. Be on your guard at all the times and don't get caught unaware. If you're called in to provide emergency care or intensive care, don't try to be the Superman in the fashion parade. I see a lot of my medicine residents and even other residents who are so detesting to wear PPE that you find them in all kinds of clothes working in the infected environment. So you definitely don't need to be the Superman. Please wear your PPE. When there is an exposure or when there is an intubation or an extubation happening or suction, then all other staff should be staying outside. You don't need to be in the room where intubation is happening. You might be curious to know what's intubation and how they are intubating, but this definitely may not be the time when you need to learn that. We have already have one case who was exposed exactly in this fashion. A faculty was there in a particular room and she was completely in her PPE and the patient was being intubated by someone else and yet she caught the infection. Let's talk a little bit more about PPE. So a lot of us think that when you are wearing the PPE, you are safe. This is only a myth. If you are wearing a PPE, you are still at the potential to get infected. Now, what is PPE? A PPE is a personal protective equipment. It may be masks, goggles, gloves, face shields, head covers, shoe covers, or the entire hazmat suit. All of these constitute the PPE. And it is not that one PPE is better or worse than the others. It depends where you are working, what you are doing, and depending upon that, you would be required to wear the PPE which is most appropriate and suited to the setting so that you are faced or you are helped and protecting yourself. Masks, yes, they're the most important equipment or a part of your PPE, and it's important to use them judiciously. So far, we've got a good supply of N95 masks in our hospital, and people are getting N95 masks, but you definitely need to use them judiciously as demands may rise very acutely, and there might not be enough supply to cater to those demands. You need to know when you need and where you need what personal protective equipment in order to protect yourself. Now, in this particular webinar, we are not going to talk about how to don and how to doff, but yes, included in this webinar are videos which you have links to, and enough videos have been made by all hospitals, by all academics, and some have been floated by the New England Journal of Medicine. I have shared video links with you, and it's advisable that you do see these links so that you are prepared when you need to don that PPE suit. A little more about masks. A lot of people have questions. Is it okay to lower the mask down when you're eating food? Is it okay to slip it aside when you're talking on the phone? How do you remove it? Do you pinch it from the front and take it off? How do you reuse it? Please do look around when you are talking to your colleagues. And if you find your colleague is not wearing a mask while he's talking to you, please pick up the gun and shoot them or ask them not to talk to you. Place your mask carefully. Make sure that it covers your mouth and your nose, and tie securely to minimize any gaps between your face and the mask. Avoid touching the mask while you're wearing it, so that it's a habit. All of us do it all the time. When you have a mask, you have a tendency to touch it more often. And the more you touch it, the more infected your hands are getting. So please avoid touching it when you're wearing it. When you remove it, do not touch it or pinch it from the front. Please take it off from the inside or from the ties behind you. After removal, clean your hands with alcohol-based hand rub or soap each time that you remove your mask. And you replace your mask as soon as they become damp with a new clean and dry mask. Since we are lucky to be in GTB and probably lucky to be in India, we are getting enough number of N95 masks. This is not the case all around the world. A lot of your colleagues in the United States may not be getting any masks at all. They're given just one mask and told to reuse it for life. So please use that N95 very judiciously. It's worth its value in real gold. So the virus has a life of its own even after death, and no one else to tell us more and better about this than Dr. Arvind Kumar, who is the expert on forensic. So Dr. Arvind, would you tell us more about how the virus lives on and has the potential to infect us even after the patient dies? Dr. Arvind, you could unmute
Yes.
your mic and speak. Yes.
I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Will you please give me to share my
Yes,
screen?
I will.
Okay.
Yes, doctor.
Is my slides there?
Yes.
Okay. But unfortunately, I am not able to see my own slide. Anyway, handling the dead, the patient who died due to coronavirus, or it's a suspecting case. As the poll is rightly said, the infection by a positive case is we are not supposed to worried about. We are supposed to worried about the cases who are still the test is vetted, or there is no history is available that person is either having a COVID positive or negative. That is suspected cases. So for me, it's divided into two type of cases. One is confirmed case and one is suspected case. If the dead is positive, then we have to do all the measures I am going to tell you. And if it's a suspected case, then the suspected case are those cases in which at least one epidemiological history feature is available, is present in the case, along with two clinical features. Epidemiological history is like a person in last 14 days traveled or residing in a hotspot area, or he get in contact with a COVID positive case, and if he has in contact with a person who has respiratory features and symptoms, but and that person is residing in hotspot areas, or he has 3 clinical features. So any of these 2 is a suspected case. But most of the person who came to the casualty, they are already dead at the time at the arrival. So at that time, when there is no history is available or any unidentified dead should be treated as a suspected case. So whenever a dead is there in the casualty, if the status of the person is not known, then consider that dead body as a suspected case of COVID positive. So when a dead is there, either in the ward, ICU, or in casualty, so nasopharyngeal swab should be taken if it is not taken already in the ward. If it's a dead, then it is advisable that nasopharyngeal swab should be taken at the emergency itself. This is the guidelines by the ICMR, in which it suggested that nasopharyngeal swab should be taken in the casualty itself. If the patient is died during the treatment, all the tubes, brains, catheter, IV cannula should be removed, and the wound which is created by the drain, catheter, or IV cannula should be cleaned with 1% hypochlorite solution, and this open wound and this open hole should be sealed with the impermeable dressing. As after that, there is a oozing out of secretions which are oozed out from the oral or nasal orifice. So the nasal and oral orifice should be plugged with the cotton plug, and the body bag, and then the body should transferred into the body bag, which should be uh, uh, preferable it's a transparent body bag, so that it is easier to identify to seeing the face of the body at the time of identification by the relatives or by the police person. Then after when the body is shifted into the body bag, the exterior of the body bag should be decontaminated by the 1% hypochlorite solution. Then again, a second hospital sheet or a sheet which is provided by the relatives should be wrapped over this body bag, and then the proper labeling, the name of the patient, this is hospital CR number or whatever the particular of the patient should be written, and the status of the COVID, that is it's a COVID positive or a suspected case, or it's a COVID negative, should be mentioned to the exterior of the body, that sheet. If the patient is died in a ward or in ICU, the healthcare worker which is working in the in the ICU should not took the body to the mortuary. The second person, which is another healthcare worker, should take the body from ICU to the mortuary. And as the body is packed in a particular body bag, so that healthcare worker should be taken all the standard precautions, and all the standard universal precautions should be taken by that health worker. But that person is not, PP is not required for that person. The vehicle or trolley that in which the body is shifted to the mortuary should be decontaminated, with 1% hypochlorite solution. In the mortuary, there's, if space is available, the chambers are enough, then the area should be identified and it should be separated from the COVID and non-COVID. So the only the where the area is specified for the COVID patient, should that bodies are preserved in that chambers. But if there is a lack of space, then you identified the 2 or 3 trolleys or space for COVID patient, and that space should be at the level of trolley, so that there is a minimum handling of the body to shift it from trolley to the chamber. And proper logbook should be maintained at the mortuary, and the temperature at where the dead body should be preserved is 4 to 8 degrees centigrade. And embalming should not be performed. It's only be if a body should be transferred. Embalming is used to transfer the body from one place to another place. So embalming should not be performed. But if the body should be transferred from one district to another district, then it should be transferred in a portable cooling chamber. Portable cold chamber is available in the market. So that in that chamber, body is preserved for at least 72 hours. So body should be transferred in that particular chamber.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind. Thank you for those valuable inputs. And yes, so there has been a lot of dilemma or ambiguity about this. In fact, even I used to think that probably once the patient is dead and after 3 or 4 days, any nasal swabs are irrelevant because they will come negative. However, in our own experience in GTB hospital, we have found that swabs taken as long as 5 days after death have shown enough virus in them to get an RT-PCR positive in these patients. Thank you so much for those. And let's go on further from here. And in the last 10 minutes in this presentation today, there's another poll. Let me open another poll to you. It's coming on your screens now. So this asks, which of the following specimens received in your laboratory can be potentially infectious for the coronavirus? So you have 4 choices. Is it the urine for cytology? Is it the ascitic fluid cytology in suspect cirrhosis case? Is it the specimen of resected carcinoma breast, which was operated yesterday? Or is it the bronchial lavage fluid? You can vote on this now, and you can take your choices. We will have the poll open for another 10 seconds, and then I would invite Dr. Sonal to discuss the results of the poll, which will then come up on your screens. I'm closing this poll now, and I am sharing the results with you. And Dr. Sonal, please go ahead and discuss the results with the audience. So almost 100% of people say it's the bronchial lavage. Dr. Sonal.
Okay, so if you look at the results, can I have the results again? Oh,
it's yes.
Yeah, sorry. So actually, a specimen which is coming urine for cytology, ascitic fluid, carcinoma breast, it says it was operated yesterday. So it's been like less than maybe 24 hours, you know, when you received it. So I've just told you that a large specimen which has been not in the formalin for at least 2 to 3 days has a potential for infection. Okay, so all of these are actually the potential for, they are all potentially infectious. Urine, yes, there are studies, I'm sure Dr. N.P. Singh can confirm with it, that it can be potentially infectious. It's not much, but yes, the fluid, ascitic fluid, can also be potentially infectious. So all of this was the correct answer. And another thing you have to remember is frozen specimens also. So frozen specimens are actually contraindicated in a COVID positive patient. But the problem is many of our patients may not have had been tested. So they're all like, potentially positive, suspected. So in those scenarios, that is why we should say no to all frozen specimens, because when they come to you, they are not in any preservatives, they've not been exposed to any formalin, and there's a high chance of infection. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, Dr. Sonal. And taking the poll away, let's talk a little bit about the report. What happens when you get the report? It's ideal that you treat every patient as positive, even if they are proven otherwise. A positive patient is usually harmless, but a negative colleague may not be as harmless. And a report is practically a mirage that you are looking at in the desert. If you're having those tea breaks and common samuhik lunch in your department, it's better to stop those tea clubs and community lunches. Please don't eat in the mess or in the canteen. If it's necessary, then carry your food and eat in your own rooms. It's better you don't talk while you are chewing the food, because that spreads the virus even more and the droplets are even higher. So what will you do when you get exposed? Sooner or later, we will find that all of us are exposed, and then the panic breaks loose. What to do now? I'm exposed. What next? What should I do? I have symptoms. Oh no. And I tested positive. What happens next? So here is another one of our own residents who tested positive, went through this grind of COVID positivity. And I'm just playing a recorded message that he has shared with us on his own experiences and his own dealing with COVID-19.
Hi, this is Dr. Weber. I'm a surgery resident. Even before I was handed over my test report, I was quite suspicious of having COVID-19 because of the set of symptoms I had. And by the time my reports came, my symptoms had already started improving. But yeah, speculating is one thing and confirmation is another. And when my confirmed report was handed over to me, I was scared, terrified, and my mind was filled with all the ominous thoughts. Thankfully, the journey was not as difficult as I had first imagined, and all my symptoms improved within a week. I did not develop any complication. The anosmia did trouble me initially, but it's going to be a month now, and much of it has improved. The most important factor which helped me tide over this crisis was the support of my friends, family, and teachers, and without them, it won't have been possible to spend 17 days in complete isolation without any human contact. For me, more than the physical discomfort was the mental anguish that troubled me. And a large part of it was relieved when I came to know that all my contacts had tested negative. On a positive note, this disease did teach me a lot about my priorities in life and made me realize the worth of all that life has given me. I would like to say that until we have a drug therapy or a vaccine, we are left with our immune system to deal with this menace, and to keep it strong, we must keep positive thoughts in our mind at all times. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was Weber, who was the first resident in our hospital to have tested positive for COVID-19, and he came out with it in the battle successful. So I take it off from here, and probably the last take-home message slide from me would just pick up a few points. Minimize your phone use in the patient care areas. It's important to follow hand hygiene after wearing and after removing the mask. Face shields, eye protection, masks in outpatient are important, and you need to get the circulation right. If you see that window closed, please open that closed window. Plan your visits to patient care areas appropriately so that you minimize contact. Stay out when an aerosol generating procedure is being done in an area. If you're wearing the PPE, you are still not safe. The test report, which is negative, is a mirage. Treat it as positive, because the next day you might find the results have changed. Stop those tea breaks in your department if you're still carrying them on. If exposed, stay calm and approach the quarantine committee, which is already there in the hospital. And finally, if you are still feeling that this is not for you, remember, sabka number aayega. There are a few questions and raised hands. I see one raised hand by Teresa Tulangi. I'm unmuting your mic now. If you are still here with us, would you kindly share your concerns and your question, Teresa? Teresa? I think probably she's left the panel after raising her hand. I will ask Dr. Rajarshi Kar, who's also raised his hand, to raise his question now. Dr. Rajarshi.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rajesh Kar. I'm assistant professor in biochemistry department. So my question is, like I remember I suppose 1.5 months back, remember seeing Dr. Guleria on national TV saying that there's no report of viremia. So he said that probably blood is not a potential infectious agent. So has that status changed? Are there reports which says that other samples, other tissues, or other fluids other than the fluids related to the respiratory system is also a potential source? So are there studies or reports on it?
Dr. Sonal, would you like to address that?
Actually, few case reports have shown, like especially like in feces it is present. In urine also they've said occasional case reports have shown, and blood I'm not very sure, but if it's coming to the urine, it must be coming from blood only. So I think we have to consider everything as potentially positive.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see Teresa, you are here. Teresa, would you like to raise your question? You had raised your hand. Teresa? Sure, we are not able to get across to her. Now there's another question by Dr. Mohit Mendirata for Sonal. Again, let me try and unmute Mohit so that he can ask this question himself, because it reads pretty long. So it would be better if Mohit asks. Dr. Mohit, all yours.
Thanks, Dr. Ashish. Okay, the question is actually all the residents, all the PGs, they're collecting the samples for their thesis. And my experience is their guards are low while they're collecting the samples. They don't take any precaution. And they have a prolonged contact with the patients or the controls while they're collecting the data. So, and they are like collecting the sample and then they bring it to the labs and they're processing it on their own. So, can you have a word on like what precautions they should take? It will go as a message for all of them, I think. Thank you.
I think when we are handling blood, the universal precautions are always there. You have to be cautious. And the thing is, especially, it's more for actually bronchial specimens, but for blood also, you can say, we should not try to, shake and everything which can potentially generate aerosols. Those procedures should be avoided. And while drawing samples, the same precautions as when you are talking to a patient, like Dr. Ashish has already mentioned, you ask the patient to turn his face away and while drawing the samples. So that precaution is there, and they have to wear at least gloves and a mask while doing all this. And
What about?
yeah.
And then in the lab also, like even if they come to biochemistry or like in micro or pharmacology, in pathology, they have to discard their samples properly.
Yeah,
The biomedical waste management part.
That is the basic that continues, no? Because this virus is fragile enough to be, when you do a proper biomedical waste management, it will be taken care of.
Thank you.
Dr. Ashish has
क्वेश्चन आंसर चल रहा है.
I think Dr. Ashish has probably been disconnected. So, and I know we don't have access to the questions. I think Ashish is back because the screen is down. Yeah, Ashish, you're back.
Yes, so I hope Rajarshi's question was addressed completely and in totality by family and outside family. So the last question that I see on the panel is by Dr. Bharat Singh. And if Dr. Bharat Singh is here, why not get him on directly? Yes, Dr. Bharat Singh is here. So Dr. Bharat Singh, I would invite you to ask your question directly on the effectivity of thermoscanners.
Okay.
So the question is, how effective are these temperature recording guns to take the temperature? So these thermoscans are handheld thermoscanners, which will take the body temperature off the surface of the individual. Yes, Dr. Bharat Singh.
My question is how this thermal guns are effective for noting the body temperature. I think many times we have seen in the airport, in the hotels and the railway station, they are just the formalities, not actually recording the temperature. How effective are these thermal guns?
So if the thermoscanners are appropriate or of a good quality, yes, they can read the temperature of your skin surface without providing actual contact by using infrared technology. However, the limitation is that they can only read temperature and they can tell you if the patient is febrile or not febrile. They would not be of any effect in telling the person whether it's COVID infected or not COVID infected, what is the reason for temperature. I see, Dr. Sumita, that you would like to contribute to this question. Dr. Sumita, you want to speak something? Okay, so yes, that's my understanding that the temperature thermoscanners, which are handheld infrared devices, can be effective if of good quality in reading the temperature, but they are of little use if they are being used to identify COVID, which is not their primary gain. The same question has also been raised by Dr. Sunita Kalra, and I hope the same it's sorted out in this response.
Okay, thank you, Ashish and the team.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat Singh. I believe that if we have no further questions, we can close the webinar for today. And I thank all my panel to join in. If you have some closing remarks, I would invite you to provide your closing remarks. Dr. Arvind.
Thank you, Dr. Ashish, for giving me opportunity to say my opinion. So my home way words are, as the period is long. So first case which is appeared in which is we are getting in this corona world is March. So April has been, अब मई आ गया है. तो जैसे जैसे इट्स टाइम इज लॉन्ग, तो हमारी जो शक्ति होती है जिसमें हम अपना कॉन्शियस लेवल से वी कैन टेक ऑल द प्रिकॉशंस, ये धीरे धीरे कम होने शुरू हो जाते हैं. दैट इज द टाइम व्हेन वी गेट लेस actively involved in the taking the precautions. So be alert all the time and take all the necessary precautions, take all the steps that is given by the authorities to protect ourselves and to the family. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind. जैसा आपने कहा, अभी तो लड़ाई शुरू हो रही है, अभी लड़ाई बहुत लंबी है, हिम्मत बहुत लंबे समय तक रखनी होगी. Dr. Sumita.
Yes. Thank you, Ashish. We know सबका नंबर आएगा, So I, being a pharmacologist, would like to say that there are drugs in the pipeline. So there is hope. And just to name a few, trials are on, clinical trials in various phases, phase 2, phase 3. There is remdesivir, the antiviral drug, which is being tried in different phases. There are various immunomodulatory techniques, the convalescent plasma, tocilizumab, baricitinib, anakinra, which are all being tried in different phases. And convalescent plasma, we know, has proved to be curative in many patients. And of course, vaccine trial is going on, especially the, as far as I remember, the adenovirus 5 vectored vaccine, which is being manufactured by Sino-Biotech. The interim results are expected by the end of summer. So a modest estimate will be 1 year. 1 year, though WHO director has said 18 months, but a modest estimate will be at least 1 year that vaccines will take to come. So till then, we have to stay safe. We have to take all the precautionary measures. That's all we have at the moment. And yes, pep up our immunity. So there is some role, studies are there that vitamins, then chemoprophylaxis, though controversial, these are all we can take, we can do to pep our immune status and stay safe. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sumita. बिल्कुल ठीक कहा आपने, उम्मीद पर दुनिया कायम है. And
Yes,
Dr. Sonal, your closing comments from here.
Yeah, so since gradually the hospital will start functioning entirely, we'll start getting the total specimens, everything, the workload is going to come back to square one. So we must continue to practice all these preventive techniques. It should become a second nature to us, maintaining hand hygiene and other social distancing and everything. And do not panic अगर आपकी posting का number आता है, because it all most of it depends on not just PP but how you wear PP and how you maintain your hygiene. So don't worry. So keep your morale high, and we should get through this. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you. Thank you to all my panelists, and thank you to the attendees for having joined in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.